that we're just tracking what's going on in the markets. There's a bunch of floating bits out there. As I mentioned, the energy complex is moving higher. European natural gas is exploding higher. Oil prices are moving up. That's helping our index. Today, we're awaiting an announcement from U.S. President Biden that could prohibit some U.S. investments in China. So we'll be looking for color on what that could potentially mean. Speaking of China, annual CPI fell in July for the first time in 28 months, and PPI, producer prices, extended its decline for a 10th straight month. So as we are all concerned about an inflationary environment, China is in outright deflation, though that's stoking some hopes for stimulus. It is against this backdrop that we are seeing the TSX rally quite broadly. And as I mentioned, energy is sort of the belle of the ball right now. Let's bring in James Callahan, Associate Portfolio Manager at Barometer Capital Management. James, thanks so much for joining us. Energy, kind of the star performer today. It's interesting, though, as we see this huge move up in crude, energy stocks this time around, I call it in the last 3 months or so, have underperformed the move in crude. How are you thinking about your energy allocation these days?
So it's an allocation that we've been slowly building to as we've seen the move in crude. Actually, in the U.S. and Canada, there's been some great investment opportunities in the U.S., even though it's a smaller part of the index. You notice it less, but names like Hess around the margins have actually been putting up quite decent months of performance. So it's a position that we've been building to across the firm, as it seems increasingly more and more like large cap U.S. technology is passing the torch to some other sectors.
And it sounds like that's kind of the relay race that you're following. Are you taking profits on big names like NVIDIA today, which is under pressure, and putting it towards what have been the laggards in 2023?
That's right. Around the margins we have been. So NVIDIA actually remains our largest position as a firm, but we have trimmed it over the last week. And yes, as the U.S. technology names have come under pressure, we've been taking some profits, because the fact is there are some great other sector exposures, some fantastic innovation. There's plenty to own in both the U.S. and Canada right now, outside of the largest 10 names in the U.S.
It's interesting. It's still your top position, NVIDIA is, but you're pulling back on your exposure. Are you worried that the earnings, when it comes in about 2 weeks' time, could be a big kind of sell the news event?
I think that with the announcement yesterday of the Grace Hopper super chip, we may actually see some noise around the quarters now, where it had seemed before as though the outlook would be for smooth sailing for the next few quarters, as NVIDIA lapped some really easy compares last year. It's possible, and it still is too early to say. We'll have to see. It's possible that some of the large purchasers of H100 data center GPUs will look at that new product coming to market in Q2 of 2024 and delay purchasing decisions. So that it's too early to say now. That's something that we're watching, but it could create some noise around the quarter.
There's pockets of hype. Obviously, AI is one of them. Yesterday, we saw it in full display for those weight loss drugs that are marketed as diabetes drugs, as well as obesity drugs, but they do have a significant off-label use for weight loss, even if you're not suffering from either of those. How concerned are you about the run-up? Would you be looking to continue to buy, like an Eli Lilly, a Novo Nordisk, even Weight Watchers that got a benefit?
So not concerned. The growth in that specific drug category is, our view is that it's going to be just huge. Definitely confirmatory information yesterday out of that long-term Novo Nordisk study looking at individuals who were taking Wegovy over 5 years. They looked at 17,500 people overweight or obese over the age of 45 with a history of heart conditions. And they found that versus a placebo group, instances of cardiac events were 20% lower in individuals who are taking Wegovy, which for us increases the probability that we're going to see widespread insurance coverage of these drugs, which has been a hurdle, just the cost. In the U.S. per month, you could probably look to spend about $1,000 per month on Ozempic, Wegovy, or Mounjaro. And with widespread insurance coverage, it explodes the total addressable market for these drugs.
It sounds like a lot of your investment ideas are skewing towards the U.S. How would you rate the U.S. versus Canada right now?
Well, Canada's definitely taking the torch on a day like today. And our view is that we do see some strength in commodities and we do see some strength in energy. which we're going to be investing in Canada to get that exposure. There are isolated pockets of strength in the US, but I would say our exposure has shifted towards Canada over the last 2 weeks, really, as we've seen some cracks start to appear in the US.
And where in Canada? Energy, definitely. Financials, what other sectors?
And those are the big ones. Industrials as well. There are some great Canadian industrials exposures that are benefiting from some reshoring trends. Like, I think the Chinese deflation today actually, it does go to show the extent to which we're seeing the reshoring trade have an impact on the Chinese economy. And I think a lot of investors have been underweight China over the last 2 years, really since the tech crackdown in 2020. Where investors have had exposure and where we've had exposure has been to the higher end Chinese consumer, which has been healthy. But this just goes to show that the youth unemployment issue is going to be a big hurdle to overcome, and the effects of reshoring are severe.
Financials is an interesting sector because it's really the haves and have-nots. The haves have been largely the insurers. The have-nots have been the big banks. We're getting a sense of how the insurers perform. Sun Life, Great-West Life reporting results that, were mixed, but generally getting a positive reception. Would you prefer the insurers over banks? Would you look to do some horse trading?
We do still prefer the insurers over the banks in both the U.S. and Canada. There are some opportunity in large cap U.S. banks, we think as well. But yeah, good numbers out of the Canadian insurers that reported last night. We have a position in Sun Life. I think that expectations were high, just given how much these names have run and how they've been a relative outperformer within the sector. But solid numbers, no issue with the numbers. We still favor the insurers.
Before I let you go, I'm just curious, do you own Nuvei? Have you ever looked at this one?
We've owned it in the past, but our process got us out of Nuvei a long time ago. It's one that we've not been involved in some time.
It sounds like